December 5th, 1926. Luther Two-Gun Bishop, a man who'd stared down some of Oklahoma's most dangerous criminals, was himself gunned down in his own home. 8 .45 caliber bullets did the job. His wife Edith, a quote, pleasant-faced homebody, end quote, said he died in her arms. His killers? Never caught. Nearly a century later, the case remains one of Oklahoma's longest running and most famous cold cases. Decades of Heistory covers true crime mysteries like this, along with bank heists, safe cracking, and more, from 1926 up until U.S. involvement in World War II. And we are heavy on Oklahoma crimes in this episode. Luther Bishop's reputation was built on chasing down the roughest train robbers, bank bandits, and outright killers. So when he turned up dead, it was logical to assume that the shooter was a criminal he'd once put behind bars or one of their allies. Yet, 3 days later, police arrested his wife. Edith claimed she had no motive, was arrested nonetheless, was tried, and a jury later agreed with her by acquitting her. So what was her story? She said that her husband, Luther, had hung up his holster for the night with the revolvers draped over the bedpost. She was asleep in a separate bed just 3 feet away when shots rang out. She said she saw a dark figure blotting out the light and heard footsteps. Yet, their son, a visiting friend, and her father all claimed they heard nothing. When police arrived, Bishop's 2 revolvers, his constant companions, from which he got the name Two Gun, were gone. They turned up later. Where? In a closet, in a card box, each gun with 4 empty chambers. Possible and, I think, logical suspects reads like a roll call of 1920s villains. Big Jim McGraw, who Bishop once captured but escaped, and who was then worth a $50,000 reward if caught again. Notorious fugitives who we've covered a bunch of times, Matthew Kimes and Ray Terrill. Anyone associated with the Osage murders, another story we've covered in the past, and surviving gang members who ran with Al Spencer, who Bishop killed after Oklahoma's last great train robbery. All very logical options, yet the trail went cold. But Oklahoma's criminal headlines for August of 1927 did not. While Bishop's murder baffled the investigators, other Oklahoma criminals were being caught. Henry Wells, a repeat bank robber, hit the Wayside State Bank in Kansas on a Tuesday in August. By Wednesday night, he'd been arrested near Okeeha, Oklahoma. By Thursday, he'd been identified by bank cashier Clyde Snap, who happened to be the man that Wells had locked in the vault during the heist. Wells had already done time in the past for bank robbery and even stood trial twice for another job, although he did beat those charges. This time, however, he wasn't so lucky. Then there were Charles Ross and Joe Leonard, who robbed the First National Bank of Kingston, Oklahoma. 24 hours later, they were on their way to prison. Out of the $3,000 they stole, they'd managed to spend $500 of it before being caught a mere 1 hour after the heist. Both pled guilty essentially on the spot. And in Wichita, Kansas, a Porter Meeks, who'd once been convicted of robbing a bank in Cushing, Oklahoma, was shot dead. He'd been paroled from a 25-year sentence, but this time his return to crime proved fatal. Well, south of the Red River, the stories kept coming. First, a follow-up to our July episode titled "A Blonde, a Lawyer, and a Teddy Bear Walk into a Bank." Kansas City attorney Glenn L. Bruner, who'd been accused of involvement in the robbery of the First Bank of Truscott, was cleared. A jury found, quote, no bill, end quote, meaning that they didn't find enough evidence to convict. Then came the University of Texas robbery in Austin, Texas, when 3 well-dressed young men between the ages of 21 and 25 walked in with guns out and shouted, hands up. The initial take was pegged at about $1,000 in cash and $5,000 in Liberty bonds. But these young men missed the real treasure, which was $65,000 in cash and securities sitting, waiting in the vault. Unknowingly, they left behind perfect fingerprints. Now, at the time, 5 employees were in the bank, but a quick-thinking bookkeeper named Miss Maud Potts slipped out the back to call police. The getaway car, a stolen sedan with stolen plates, was later found with a flat tire near an area called Hooper's Switch. A search by Texas Rangers, deputies, and guardsmen turned up nothing. And the revised final tally was over $26,000 in stolen cash, bonds, and checks. Well, not all 1927 losses came at gunpoint. Dallas lawyer and investor George A. Carden lost $4 million in a sudden Wall Street collapse involving the Manhattan Electrical Supply Company. Prices crashed, then rebounded. Carden claimed he, quote, never bought a share to raise its price, end quote, which sounds about as convincing as a bank robber saying he only wanted to borrow the money. Up north, a robbery gang made repeated cracks at North Dakota banks in August of 1927. They failed at Citizens State Bank in Wheelock, which we've covered in the past, then hit the Tioga Bank. Authorities linked the jobs by a tactical signature, that of breaking through a brick vault wall. In addition, another attempt was made in Lignite, and a small successful score was had at the Bank of Northgate, all 4 tied to this same crew. In South Dakota, one robber's nerves cost him dearly. After holding up the First State Bank of Stratford, he stuffed the loot into his overalls, but in his rush to escape, he dropped approximately $1,800 of the $2,300 take, leaving a money trail all the way up to his getaway car. In Carson City, Nevada, 2 former state officials faced a $500,000 embezzlement trial. But in Illinois, the bankers were fighting back. An armed citizen program slashed bank robberies by 60% over a 16-month period. 10,000 volunteers were ready to, quote, shoot to kill, end quote, if robbers struck. Iowa had a similar armed network that we've covered in the past. They boasted that one gang leader was, quote, buried with his skin plentifully pierced with bullet holes, end quote. But while vigilantes armed themselves, Chicago's courts seemed to be working in reverse. In Cook County, as many criminals were put on probation as were sent to prison, even those convicted of armed robbery and other violent crimes. The Chicago Crime Commission called it dangerous leniency. From Oklahoma bedrooms to vaults in the Dakotas, August of 1927 had heated up. Sometimes it was quick and brutal. Sometimes it was dressed in a 3-piece suit. And sometimes, as in the murder of Luther Two-Gun Bishop, it left behind only questions, a cold case, and a mystery that still endures. Next week, we begin September of 1927.